Hello and welcome back. For this last section on differences and comparison, we're going to look again at the data on land area use in some African countries. And we're just going to quickly recreate the pie chart that we had for land use in the Congo. Now, I've selected the data and insert pie 2D, and there we are. Now, one of the alternatives that we looked at before for showing this sort of information was the stacked chart. So let's go back now, change the chart type, go to bar and choose 100% stacked bar in 3D. Click on OK. Now, in order to get the correct effect here, we need to switch rows and columns, and on doing that we see that this type of bar chart shows us pretty much the same sort of information that we could see with the pie chart: the distribution, forests and jungles, cropland, meadows and pastures, other. And obviously this is an alternative to a pie chart. It is an alternative, but it also has some advantages as well. And one of the most obvious advantages I can show you by grabbing the edge of the data area, dragging it down, say, to cover 3 countries. And as we saw before, we can actually have any number of these bars. And not only for each bar can we see the percentage of land use in each of our 4 categories, but we can see 3 countries at the same time, so that we can draw a comparison between them as well. Now, in effect, this is not possible with a pie chart, because with a pie chart we show the composition of one entity, the breakdown of one entity. We can have many categories within it, but we're still talking about one entity. We could, of course, in a report put a number of pie charts side by side, but it doesn't have the obvious way of doing that this use of a bar chart does. Now, there is an alternative with pie charts, which I'm going to show you next, but it's worth bearing this bar chart option in mind when you have more than one entity whose breakdown into components you want to show. Now, the particular chart that can be used for this purpose is a donut chart. And if we change the chart type, scroll down, we find donut. There are actually 2 variants. There's the exploded donut and the straightforward donut. So I think you probably work out by now what the exploded donut is. Let's just do the straightforward regular donut. Click on OK. And you can see, in fact, that we have 4 donut rings, which are clearly the land use categories. They're not the 3 countries. And then within each of the 4 rings we've got a coloured bar for each of the 3 countries, which is really not what we want at all. Now, although there are no apparent axes here, we have the usual problem that we get, which is we need to switch the rows and columns to get the effect we need. So switch them over, and okay, we've now got 3 rings. That's 1 for each of the 3 countries, and then for each of those countries we have 4 bands in it corresponding to the 4 types of land usage. Now, I'm not a particularly great fan of the donut chart, but I do use them from time to time, and you will see them and use them from time to time yourself probably. So let's just go through some of the fundamentals of formatting one of these. We have chart layout options, of course. We can choose to have legend, title, and so on. So I would suggest that in this case we stick with the basic layout we've got, but perhaps include a title. I'm going to edit the title to say land use by category, and we have the percentages to support the visual size of usage for each of the three countries. We can't currently see what the three countries are. So let's right click on the donut itself and say Format Data Series. Now then, within the Format Data Series dialog, we can specify a number of options that we've seen before. Basically, we can change the angle of the first slice from 0 degrees or 12 o'clock. We can, of course, explode the donut and change the percentage explosion here. And we also have an option here to increase or decrease the size of the hole in the donut. If you make the hole quite a bit bigger, let's say put it up 75%, click on close, the bars of course get a lot thinner. But depending on the number of rings in the donut, you may or may not need to make the hole bigger or smaller to make an effect. And sometimes people actually put some sort of graphic in the middle of one of these holes. You may need to change the size to make up for that. I'm going to set that back. Again, right click on the donut itself now, and this time we're going to say Format Data Labels. Now, in terms of formatting the labels on this donut chart, it's actually quite tricky. If I move the dialog a little bit, you can see that we have the legend with the types of land use, which is fine, corresponding to the color key for the parts of the donut rings. But the labeling of the countries is quite difficult. We could have a system of pointers and so on coming in here. But the facilities that are built into the donut chart in Excel 2010 do sort of work after a fashion, but they usually take quite a bit of work to get them to look reasonably good. At the moment, the donut rings we've got only show the percentages in each of the sectors. If I put in the series name, which will be the country in this case, let me just show you what happens. For the ring that's selected, which is currently the middle one, the one for Egypt, I now see Egypt followed by the percentage for each of the rings. I could remove the percentage. It's a little bit easier to see Egypt, but of course it says Egypt everywhere around the ring. There isn't really a particularly convenient way of overcoming that problem. And I could select each of the rings in turn, so the outer one, and again click on Format Data Labels, series name, remove percentage, and I could actually set all of the countries up like that, but I'm not sure that whatever I do is going to make it look particularly helpful. But in a particular situation, one thing that can help is if you click on Format Data Series and reduce the hole size, say to 20%, let me now close that. You can sometimes arrange things as I've got here so that a combination of the legend, the names of the series, in this case the country name, possibly with the percentages as well, and a bit of judicious sizing of the central hole, you can sometimes make something that's reasonably readable. But it usually takes quite a bit of work with a donut chart to make something that gets over a clean, clear message. So we've looked at pie charts and bar charts in relation to differences and comparisons, and right at the beginning of this look at differences and comparisons I mentioned that we sometimes steer clear of column charts because of the general tendency for people to associate column charts with progression over time. But in fact, from a validity point of view, of course, they're a perfectly valid way of doing things, and pretty much you're going to use the same ideas and approach with column charts that you do with bars. So I'm just going to finish off this section with a quick look at some of the column charts. Let's stick with our land use by category donut chart, where we have 3 countries and the land use in the 4 categories. Let's go to change chart type, just show just how straightforward this is. Let's go up to column and let's choose just a 3D clustered column. Click on OK. Now again we need to interchange our rows and columns, and we have Congo, Egypt, Ghana. We have some data labels on there that are going to confuse things. We've got a legend as well. So let's go to layout. Let's say no data labels. Makes it a bit easier to read. The grid lines are probably fine to give us a good idea of the actual values, although we don't have any units shown here, so maybe we should just change the design. Let's choose one which has got a title, a vertical axis title and a legend. That's fine. Now clicking the axis title, I'm going to actually put an axis title in there. I'm going to say land area and then in brackets square kilometers. Tick. And that's pretty much it really. I'm quite happy with that. Oh, there's a horizontal axis title there that I don't want, so I can select and delete. So that's a perfectly good column chart representing my information. Let's once again change the chart type. We used the 3D clustered column. Let's try this one, the stacked column in 3D. Now this one has the added advantage that we have the total area for each of these three countries, and then for each of the individual countries we can see a visual split of the percentages of land use by each of our four categories. Now for the final one of these three standard options, go back into change chart type, and this time we're going to look at 100% stacked column in 3D. What this option gives us is the percentage breakdown of land area used for each country, but it shows 100% for each country in the vertical direction. Now there are a couple of things to be careful of here, because this is the sort of chart where people can easily be misled. First of all, if you looked at this without being careful, you might think that all three countries have the same land area, which you need to be careful of. Obviously that's not the intention here at all, and at the moment in effect we've got an error here, because on the vertical axis, which is clearly marked with percentages, we've still got the axis title saying land area square kilometers. So click to select that, press the delete key, and it's gone, and then at least we don't have that element of confusion going on. Somebody reading this carefully will see we've got three countries. We'll see we're only really telling how for each of those countries the land use is divided, but it's one to be careful of. So that's the completion of this review of the approach to showing differences and comparisons within Excel 2010. In the next section we're going to start to look at relationships. So I'll see you then.